Today about what plants can teach us is Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer.
Good morning. Thank you. It's wonderful to see all your beautiful faces out there. And I would like to begin in the way that we always do in our tradition with a traditional protocol greeting. To say bonjour, manawaban. Respectful greetings, good morning. Shabadas gegish kokwen nadeshnakas. Bodwe wad mikwenda. Megazedo dem min mo makodo dem. Nin mami kwenda mampi yayan. What I've told you is that my name in my language is light shining through sky woman. I'm a member of the Potawatomi Nation of the Eagle Clan, and I'm really grateful to be here with you to share and to learn together. It is also our practice to always begin with gratitude. So I would ask that we would cast our minds back to when we just put our feet on Mother Earth this morning, that she was there to provide everything that we needed, that we had beautiful spring air to breathe and pure water to drink. We had the companionship of birds singing around us and clouds in the sky. We had one another. We had everything that we needed. We also give a special gratitude and recognition to the fact that we sit today on the ancestral homelands of the Ojibwe and Dakota people, and all gratitude for that fact that we are in this territory. And what I would like to share with you today grows out of an intersection of that little snippet of language that you heard and this notion of gratitude for the gifts of the earth. And it is, of course, united in a braid of sweetgrass. And I'm guessing that many of you, I know that many of you have engaged with the book, and certainly the children have. What a delight, from wandering in the woods with the pre-K students to really spirited debate with seniors. It's been wonderful because it's all braided through this central metaphor of a braid of sweetgrass in our language, which we call Wingashk. And let me just tell you just a tad about this, if you've not read the book, that Wingash sweetgrass is almost always seen braided because we understand this plant through our creation stories to be the hair of Mother Earth. It was one of the first plants to grow on the earth. And as a plant ecologist, I can tell you that, yes, this is a plant that when the earth is broken open, when the earth is bare, quickly comes in to heal that. So it's a healing plant, a ceremonial plant, and we braid it for the same reason we braid one another's hair. And yeah, everyone says, oh yeah. When you braid someone's hair, you come into relationship, right? You demonstrate that you care for their beauty, that you care for them. And that's why we braid sweetgrass, as that tangible sign of care for Mother Earth. And the braid that weaves the story together and has animated our conversations with students this week is that braid of traditional Indigenous knowledge, the strand of scientific ecological knowledge, and the knowledge of the plants themselves. So I have the chance to give you just a little sample of that dialogue today. And I always want to preface it with my own experience as a student. Growing up not in a reservation Potawatomi community, but in a Potawatomi extended family. And I found in many cases that by growing up in the woods and in the fields, the plants were very much my teachers about my culture and about relationship to land. And these beautiful goldenrod and asters were among my very favorites. And they just are so gorgeous together, aren't they? That purple and gold, the fields of September that I know you have here. And because I was born in mid-September, these are my birthday flowers. So I always thought, oh yeah, how could it get better than this to have this kind of celebration? And as a budding botanist, I was really intrigued by why they grew together. So, unlike your students who are wiser than I was, when I went away to college, I had to decide between, do I want to be a botanist or do I want to be a poet? And I was told that I had to choose one of those things. And I chose the path of science. So that when I met my botany advisor on the very first day of college, and he asked me, why do you want to study botany? I told him that. I want to know why the world is beautiful. I want to know why purple and gold grow together. I wanted to know about relationships. And at that 17-year-old sitting in his office, and he said, my dear, that is not science. These are not the sort of things with which botanists concern themselves. Which is why I look so happy. Yeah. I thought I had made a mistake. I had no vocabulary for resistance. There was not at that time a way to speak of traditional knowledge or even to name it, not from my experience. And I was crushed, I was disappointed, but I loved plants so much that I would learn whatever I could learn about them, always knowing that in that mechanistic, purely objective way of thinking about plants, something was missing. And I understood that, and it took me a long time to find my way back to what that was. So I'm deeply grateful to live in a world where we're able to embrace multiple ways of knowing today. Because what I understand, and I understood at that time on my first day of school, there was something happening that happened to my grandfather on his first day of school at the Carlisle Indian School, where children were taken from their families, from their native communities, as my grandfather was, 9 years old, from Oklahoma, put on a train for the Carlisle Indian School, where he was forbidden to speak his language, where he too was taught that is not the sort of thing with which we concern ourselves. And so this is deeply resonant for me with history, with personal history, with our national history, and with the healing that needs to arise as we look at these heartbreaking truths. When I went to college, I had come to college with the Indigenous paradigm in mind, of thinking about plants and the whole living world as persons, as communities of beings, not as things, not as just photosynthetic objects, but beings. And the community was like a human community, full of teachers and personalities. Oops, too fast on mine. There we go. But this is what I encounter, that this is what an ecosystem is in my first ecology class. And I thought I had wandered into an engineering class by mistake. This notion of the ecosystem metaphor being a machine, composed of objects that we humans are in charge of and that we can tweak. This dichotomy between these ways of knowing, subject and object, was very confusing for me. And my botany students today revel in knowing that I almost failed freshman botany. This was such a foreign concept to me. Because in Indigenous ways of knowing, we say that every human is given these gifts of understanding around the medicine wheel, certainly of mind and intellect, the body, what we can sense and observe, but also of spirit and emotion. But in going into scientific training, of course, what we privilege in Western science, for very good reasons, is the intellect and that which we can observe and measure. There are good reasons, because it enables us to ask and answer particular sorts of questions, but not all the questions. For that, we also need these multiple ways of knowing, which were not present in my education as a scientist. In a school of forestry and natural resources, which is where I was going as an undergraduate, land was understood as natural resources. That is part and parcel of our definition of land, isn't it? Certainly land as capital is an important concept. This concept of land as property to which one has exclusive rights, the notion of rights to land. And of course, land as ecosystem services, the provisioning that the land gives us: oxygen, water, birds, all those things for which we give gratitude. This is the dominant notion of what land means in the Western world. I had come from a community that understood land as the source of our identity. That human identity, that humans are inseparable from the land. This is who we are. We're not separate from that land. That land certainly as our sustainer, the one who takes care of us in every way. Land as the residence of our relatives, not just our human relatives, but all our or what we say more than human relatives live there too. And they're our family. We care about them as well. Certainly land as the connection to our ancestors as well as our descendants. Land as a source of knowledge. It literally is the library from which both scientific and traditional knowledge emerge. Land as our pharmacy. The source of all of our medicine in the land. And of course, we understand today the healing power of nature and all the new health science that is arising around that topic. Land as full of spirit, land as our home, land not as a place to which we have rights, but land as a place for which we have responsibility. And land as sacred. This multiple, and this is just the beginning of meanings of land, was always present for me, but not honored in academic science and natural resources at that time. And this brings us to one of the central questions of the time that we live in. Is land a source of belongings alone? Or can land be our primary source of belonging that knits us into these relationships? This is the question that we face balanced on the precipice of climate chaos in the age of the sixth extinction. A pretty important question. I am glad to tell you that right down the hall from the place where I was told, Miss Wall, botanists do not concern themselves with these things, is now the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment. And as you heard from Woody, thank you, our mission is to bring together these ways of knowing so that we can better care for the planet. And you see here Sky Woman embodying that. Many of you, probably all of your students, heard the Sky Woman story this week. Now, one of the things, of course, that we are all greatly concerned about as we sit on this precipice is sustainability. And I don't mean for you to be able to read this. This is meant to be a cloud of words, because that's kind of our thinking about sustainability. There's so many ways. It's a slippery word, isn't it? And one of my colleagues went to her, she's an Algonquin biologist, she went to her tribal council to ask for a travel grant to go to a sustainability meeting. And they said, what's sustainability? People who had been living sustainably in place for millennia didn't use that word. So she gave them all these definitions, and highlighted in yellow, you see the thing that all the definitions have in common. A strategy by which we can maintain our natural resources, our standard of living, so that the earth can continue to provide far into the future. And this is long-term thinking. This is all good that we are thinking in this way. So she was surprised when her elders fell silent and were kind of scowling. She thought, uh-oh. And they said, yeah, we want to give you that grant so that you can go to that meeting and bring them a message. And their message was, that sounds to me like they're trying to find a way to just keep on taking. True fact. That is what sustainability means. And they said, you go there and tell them that our job is not to figure out how we can keep on taking, but to figure out what it is that we have to give and give back to the earth. And this notion of sustainability, of reciprocity, of humans as more than consumers, as more than takers, that's what the Sky Woman story tells us, asks us to remember, that we are co-creators in abundance, that we have and can play a positive role, and we have forgotten that. And there are many forces out there that want us to forget that. So the question then becomes, well, what can we give? And I'm just going to give you a small smattering. I hope that you're thinking about that too. But in return for all the gifts of these plants in particular, what is it that we have to give back in return for the gift of Vodem and our strawberries, in return for Mandam and all of our foods, our plant medicines like Namibin, the ginger that will be with us soon, all the many gifts that come from Wigwasamik, the paper birch. I could go on. But if we think about all of those gifts, what do we do about that? We've been given all of this. And do we just take it? Or does the earth ask something of us in return? And of course, one of our first responses is gratitude, isn't it? We know what to do when we're given a gift. We say thank you. And what I'm talking about is more than good manners, more than politeness, deep gratitude. Because we understand that when we practice deep gratitude to the living world, to the beings whose lives are on our plates, right, and surrounding us, that when we practice deep gratitude, no one can be anonymous. We acknowledge that our lives are completely contingent upon the lives of the other beings on this planet. We also know that gratitude is an antidote to consumption. People who practice deep gratitude consume less than people who don't, because gratitude engenders a feeling of abundance rather than scarcity. So the practice of gratitude in its multiplicity of forms is actually good medicine for us and good medicine for the earth. And as we move beyond gratitude, if we think about our own gratitude protocols in our families, in our communities, if someone gives us a gift, what do we want to do? Give them a gift back. So cultures of gratitude also are cultures of reciprocity. We know this in our human communities. The work that we have to do is to extend it to the earth community. How do we give gifts back to the earth so that the earth can continue providing for every one of us? How do we do this? Well, when we look around us, this is Onondaga Lake, the sacred lake of the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois, which is right in my backyard, which is now the home of 13 different Superfund sites. We know that one of the ways that we can reciprocate the gifts of the earth is to clean up after ourselves. And one of the most powerful tools of reciprocity that combines our technical, scientific, artistic abilities is ecological restoration. And to practice restoration is a deep and meaningful form of reciprocity, which is also joyful, to work together to heal the damage that we have done. But you know, in working as an ecosystem, in ecosystem restoration, I came to understand that when you fill a sacred lake with mercury, it's not the land that's broken. It's our relationship to land that's broken. So much of my research and writing today, including Braiding Sweetgrass, is in this direction of how do we heal our relationship to land so that we don't continue to propagate these wounds across the land. And restoration, as my friend and colleague Gary Nabhan has written, is also about restoration. Finding, creating, and I think actually remembering a different story of ourselves as givers to the land, as healers of the land, and not just consumers. One of the other gifts that we have in order to reciprocate to the land is to pay attention to the land. I mean, in a world that gives us salamanders and maple syrup and flowers and medicines and bats, oh my goodness, shouldn't we at least be paying attention to this amazing place that we live? And it's important that we call it paying attention, because there is a cost, isn't there, This is something that we give with our focus, with our time, paying attention. And we'll talk all morning about that, I won't, but paying attention certainly involves starting to know the names of the beings who are around you. If you don't know the names of people in your neighborhood, can you call on them for help? Will they call on you for help? Do you feel a community? Are you resilient? No. In fact, it's really disrespectful not to know the names of the people around you, no? And yet, did you know that the American school child can recognize 100 different corporate logos? Our inherent ability to pay attention has been hijacked. You see it right here. 100 different corporate logos and 10 plants. And one of those plants is Christmas tree. So that's 9. Can we do something about this? Is coming to know our neighbors an act of reciprocity with the world? It is indeed. It cultivates that sense of belonging as opposed to belongings. And this is not just as a botanist that I tell you this. Yeah, I do love plant names, but it goes beyond that. And let me finish up with this bigger question of reciprocity, of what does the earth ask of us? And in our cultures, we talk a lot about respect. Respect for the living world as sovereign beings, as beings with their own stories, their own purposes, their own role in the world that we don't have a right to interfere with. And yet, because we are integrated into the world, we're all connected, we are animals. Much to my chagrin, none of us can photosynthesize, which means we have to take from the world, right? We have to take from the world in order to live. And if we believe the world to be a bunch of inanimate stuff, if we believe the land to be capital and property, does it matter how we take? It's just stuff. We can take it however we want. But if we understand the world as beings, as persons, as our relatives, that becomes a moral dilemma, doesn't it? Of how do we consume our relatives? And so there are ancient protocols in Indigenous communities that are ancient, but I think extremely urgent for our time. Because these are protocols about how do we consume. We have to, but how do we do it in such a way that keeps the world in balance? And so my last slide is an invitation into that protocol, which has been practiced by Native peoples all over Turtle Island since, I won't say since time immemorial, because this protocol grew out of making mistakes, making lots of mistakes, and realizing, oh, we're going to need rules for that. And here are the rules. We looked at odeamin, the heartberry, the strawberries. Let's imagine that we're walking into a field full of strawberries. And how do we take them, these wonderful fruits, these gifts? First of all, we always say, never take the first one. This is not about efficiency and productivity. We don't walk into the field and start grabbing every berry that we can. We don't take the first one. And if you never take the first one, it means you'll never take the last. Self-restraint is built into this protocol, an inherent conservation ethic. If you come to the next one, or the next one, different cultures have different protocols, we ask permission of that plant. I would address that strawberry and say, thank you, I need these strawberries for this, or I want these strawberries for this, may I have some? And now you might think that that's crazy if you saw me out in the field talking to these strawberries, like, well, I'm not going to go over there. But it's not, in a culture that views them as our relatives, that's not crazy, that's good manners. Would you walk into your grandmother's house and just start rifling through her cupboards for cookies? I say a few guilty looks. Once, you do that once. But isn't that the way we treat our beloved grandmother Earth? We just go rifling through her cupboards as if it all belonged to us. Do we stop and ask permission that we could share these things? And you know what? If you're going to ask permission, you have to listen for the answer. And how do we do that? Science is a powerful tool for listening for the answer. Is this population whole and healthy and uncontaminated enough that we can take? Science can be a great ally in practicing the honorable harvest. There are all sorts of intuitive protocols as well that different cultures have for listening for that answer. What would it be like if before we paved over a scrap of prairie, we had to ask permission of the meadowlarks? Why don't we? If that strawberry says yes, sometimes they say no, take only what you need. You don't take the whole field, you take only what you need. And our protocol says never more than half. And less, if that's what you need. Take less than you need. And what you've taken, remember, is a gift of a life, of a being. And so you don't waste it. You use everything that you take. No waste economies. Take in such a way that minimizes harm. The lesson that was always given me was don't use a shovel if a digging stick will do. Think about appropriate technologies to minimize the harm to the rest of the ecosystem. Be grateful, as we've talked about the power of gratitude. Share everything that you've taken. Did that plant just share with you its body, its children? They just shared with you. Plants are our teachers of generosity. You have to share what has been given back to you. Take only that which is given to us. An interesting philosophical and practical problem, I think, to think about. And always reciprocate the gift. Give something back. In the case of the strawberries, it might be that we weed around them to pull up the weeds. It might be that we give a spiritual gift in this small example of strawberries. But I hope what you see is that this ancient protocol for how we catch fish or pick berries has tremendous resonance for us today. Because I think for the most part, we are engaged in a profoundly dishonorable harvest that does not do honor to the lives that are given us and does not do honor to ourselves as a species. And individually, none of us can think that we're going to, control corporate outcomes or determine what the EPA does, although we should be trying. But we can control our own honor. We can control the ways in which we live. Are we in reciprocity and gratitude? So that as we begin our days with giving thanks to the earth, that we could end them by the earth being grateful for us. Mi'u, miigwech. Thank you.
Kimmerer, for this amazing book. I really enjoyed reading it. I'm happy to share stories with my kids and your research and your ideas. They've been amazing. We've enjoyed them very much. So my question is, how do we engage young people in a gift economy? How do we teach them that reciprocity works, that those gifts will come back to you when they grow up in a culture that's kind of focused on what can you buy with your contribution? So how do we get them going? How do we make them fall in love with all this?
There are, of course, many approaches to that, and I so appreciate your question and that you frame it as how do we have them fall in love. Because on that medicine wheel, we know that is where it comes from, right? When we love the world, we will not be a bystander to its destruction, and know that we have a gift to give as well. What I like to say when I'm working with students is that oftentimes we are told, well, we have responsibilities to the earth. And I don't know about you, if somebody's wagging their finger at me telling me I have responsibilities, I kind of back away a little bit. Anybody else? But what our teachings tell us that gifts and responsibilities are two sides of the same coin, and that when you're given a gift, you have the responsibility to use it well. So I really encourage young people, I encourage all of us to say, well, what are my gifts? Am I a teacher? Am I a gardener? And am I an activist? An engineer. How can I use my gift in reciprocity for those things which I have been given? But one of the, I think especially for children who have, I think, such a natural affinity for nature, as we all do. We say we are a biophilic species, right? But we've forgotten this, is to spend time in relationship with nature and be pointing out all the gives, the give and the take that you see in the living world, and how the world is knit together by giving and by taking. And seeing it in the natural world and being reminded that you are part of the natural world, that we can learn from watching those cycles in nature. Time in the woods, I think, is the best thing.
I want to echo Lenny's thoughts about listening and being privileged to be here today. How do you create communities that follow this way of looking at the earth? I'm sure there are some around, and I'm sure the Native American culture helps enhance that. But it seems to me one of the things we need to do is to create communities that build on this. We all live in little atoms, a house here, an apartment there, or spread out all over the place. And we meet together when the co-ops organize small farm tours, and this is a nice way to think about all these things.
Yeah.
But how do we create communities physically that can enhance and grow this kind of philosophy?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I know that for most of human history, that's how we lived. You know, when we look at this time in which we live, as you say, in this atomistic way, where we're not in full relationship with one another, is actually, it's a phenomenon which is only about 500 years old, only. But in the history of humankind, that's an eye blink. That's an eye blink of time. And we've kind of done the experiment of how will we feel if we isolate ourselves from one another and isolate ourselves from the earth. And we have our answer now, I think. And so there is this impetus to reframe ourselves. And I think all over the country, really all over the world, we're starting to see this shift come back. Lisa, you were telling me about transition, were they called transition communities? Transition town. Yeah, great. And there are lots of these sorts of sharing ideas of when we think, well, in a sustainable community, we would, in order to take only that which is given, you know, I don't think coal from mountaintop removal has been given to us, but the sun is, and so community solar, where not everybody has to have their own solar installation, you all get together and create solar farms, create community farms. And is there anything more satisfying than working together as a community? Part of the beauty of is this, that it makes us happy. And you know what? I think over evolutionary time in human societies, and that thing that makes us deeply happy is what will prevail. And working in community is one of those things that brings us joy. So thank you for those questions, and we have to move in exactly that direction.
I have the privilege of living in a community that's right by the Mississippi River. And one of the things the community has done is that we want to have access to the river, we want to connect with it. And together, next to a restaurant called Alma, which means soul, we've taken out the dirt and gravel and put in native plants and invited people in to serve and dig together and watch the roots and the wild gingers coming up. And I think that cultivates a sense of belonging. So in answer to John's question, he's familiar with this project, just having places where people can dig in the earth together. And our neighborhood is 85% renters. People don't own their homes, but there's a place where they can belong together. There's an eagle nest nearby now, right by the 35W bridge. So when I run in the morning and I go by the greenway, and I saw the eagles, 2 of them in the nest this morning. There have been 6 baby eagles born next to this bridge in the last 4 years. I think about renewal and hope and that storytelling, sharing that story with as many people as I can and giving them an opportunity to serve. I'm lucky in my job I have that opportunity to have people volunteer to care for the environment. What I'd love you to help us with, though, is how do you sustain yourself when around you are so many Onondaga lakes or challenges that seem beyond the capacity of yourself it needs to be a movement, so to speak, but how do you personally sustain yourself?
Let me first thank you by sharing that story of renewal and community coming together. That is how I sustain myself, having a shovel in the ground, having my hands in the earth, to feel that sense of belonging with the natural world and with human beings carrying it forward. And how do I sustain myself? One of the things that always buoys me up is actually I go to those waste beds at Onondaga Lake with some regularity because plants are growing there. We have a brand new toxic habitat that has been created, and those plants are courageous. They haven't given up. They are coming up through that industrial waste, making a community as best they can. And you know, for all the assaults that we have made on Shkakmikwe, on Mother Earth, she's not turned her back on us. Never. And to me, that is a source of renewal and courage to try to model that. To say, she's not given up, and neither can we. Because despair, as we know, is a dead end. It's not to say that we don't feel that grief. Of course we do. All around us at Onondaga Lakes, the loss of species, the things that lie on that road before us. But we transmute that grief into work and into the actions that bring us joy and renewal. I will also say that another personal source of strength for me is my culture and our teachings. I probably don't have time this morning to tell the whole story, but to say that one of our central stories among our people is the stories of the seventh fire prophecies, which foretell all the things that would happen to our people after those white sails came in the east. Being separated from our land, loss of language, all that stories and history that you know. And part of that also tells about the time when we can no longer dip a cup into the river and drink. And that we know is the time we live in when the air will become too thick to breathe and when our plant and animal relatives will start to turn away from us. This is all in our teachings, that this is in our future, and our future has come to us. But those teachings also tell us in that time, which is in this time, all the world's people, the newcomers as well as the indigenous peoples, will come together and stand at a fork in the road. And one of the paths in that fork is all soft and green and dewy grass, and you'd want to walk barefoot there. And the other path is burnt and black, it's all cinders, and it would cut your feet. And we know that we stand there. And the teachings of the seventh fire tell us that the people of the seventh fire will need great courage and great love for one another and for the living world to choose that green path. But before we can walk down that green path, we're told we have to walk backwards. We have to go back along the ancestor path and pick up the teachings that were left for us. Pick up our plant and animal relatives. Pick up the stories that guide us down that green path. Pick up the honorable harvest. All of these teachings which grew out of relationship with one another and with the earth are still there. We can all collectively go back and pick them up, remember them, put them in our bundles, and then we can walk on that green path. And that's all of us together. And knowing that we are seventh fire people keeps me walking too. And I hope it does you as well, because we're all seventh fire people.
If I may, how do we deal with this idea of reciprocity and teaching reciprocity when so many of the people now live in cities and may not even see green grass, much less a flowered field?
Yeah. This is a question that I try to explore as best I can in Braiding Sweetgrass, and because most of us do live in cities, how do we practice reciprocity when we are remote from the land? And one of the things that I think we can think about is that our currency of reciprocity with the land today, when we live in the settings that you're talking about, is not hands in the earth. You know, it's actually hands in our pockets full of money. And what is our currency of exchange? What is our currency of reciprocity in cities? And it is money, it is currency. Can we take from the earth in such a way with our currency that we model the honorable harvest? Can we might say, I can't, there's no prairie in my backyard. I can't go out and burn that prairie. I can't go out and build a bluebird house because I live in the city. But I can support those who do. I can support those who do. And conscious consumerism is certainly a part of this. I think it's also in how we think, how we vote, how we spend what Mary Oliver calls our precious lives.
Wonderful. Well, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I also want to remind everyone that we've got this book in the back outside the lobby there. I hope you'll all pick it up, take a look at it. And don't wait all year at the library the way I have. It's much better to have a hard copy in your hands. So thank you very much. It's great to have you.